There are moments in war when survival has nothing to do with strength, weapons, or courage in the traditional sense. Sometimes survival depends on silence, on knowing when not to move, on understanding that one wrong breath can mean death. This is one of those moments. A real story from the Vietnam War, where a single American soldier found himself completely alone, surrounded by the Viet Cong, deep inside the jungle, with no clear way out. If you have ever wondered how far the human body and mind can go when escape is the only option, stay with this story until the end. And as you listen, leave a comment sharing what you would have done in his place. Before we go deeper, if stories like this matter to you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write a comment related to this story. Your engagement helps keep real history alive. The jungle was never silent in Vietnam. Even when no one was speaking, it breathed. Insects screamed from every direction, leaves rubbed against each other, and unseen animals moved through the undergrowth. That constant noise made it almost impossible to tell when danger was close. And on that day, danger was closer than the soldier realized. He was part of a small reconnaissance unit, operating near a dense jungle area known for Viet Cong activity. The mission was simple on paper: move quietly, observe enemy movement, and return before nightfall. No direct engagement was expected, but Vietnam rarely followed plans. As the unit advanced, the jungle suddenly exploded with sound. Gunfire cracked through the trees, dirt kicked up around them, and shouting erupted in Vietnamese. It was an ambush. The Viet Cong had been waiting. In seconds, the carefully spaced formation collapsed into chaos. The soldier ran, not out of fear alone, but instinct. He dove behind thick roots and crawled through mud as bullets tore through foliage above him. He could hear his own breathing pounding in his ears. Somewhere behind him, his unit was returning fire, but the sounds grew distant fast. Then everything stopped. No more gunfire, no voices in English, only the jungle again. He was alone. Slowly, painfully slowly, he checked his rifle. Low on ammunition, not enough for a prolonged fight. His radio was damaged during the dive. No signal, no backup. He was deep behind enemy presence, and the Viet Cong were experts at this terrain. They knew every path, every hiding place, every trick. He pressed himself into the mud and waited. Minutes passed. Then voices. Soft, controlled, confident. Vietnamese words whispered just meters away. He could see boots through the leaves, dark clothing, rifles pointed low but ready. They were searching. Methodical, patient. The soldier did not move. A mosquito landed on his neck. He felt it bite. He did not react. Sweat ran into his eyes, blurring his vision, but he did not blink. Any movement could give him away. His heart pounded so hard he feared they could hear it. The Viet Cong moved closer. One of them stepped so near that the soldier could smell him. The scent of sweat, tobacco, damp cloth. He could hear breathing, calm, unhurried. These men were used to hunting. Hours passed like this. The sun shifted. The heat became suffocating. The mud beneath him soaked into his uniform, heavy and cold against his skin. His muscles screamed to move, but he forced them still. At some point he realized something terrifying. The Viet Cong were not leaving. They were waiting him out. They knew someone was missing. And then, just when it seemed impossible for the tension to increase, the jungle floor ahead of him revealed something he had not noticed before. A slight depression in the mud, roots arranged in an unnatural way. A dark opening partially hidden beneath leaves and water. A tunnel. Not a full Viet Cong tunnel system, but something similar. A narrow, improvised passage, likely used for quick movement or storage. It was barely visible, barely passable. It was also his only chance. He waited longer. He had no idea how long he had already been there. His sense of time was gone. All he knew was that night would eventually come, and if he was still there when it did, his chances would drop to zero. The voices shifted. The Viet Cong moved slightly farther away, still close, but no longer directly over him. This was the moment. He began to crawl. Not forward, not backward, down. He pushed his fingers into the mud, slowly easing his body toward the opening. Every inch felt like a mile. The tunnel smelled of rot and damp earth. It was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He pulled himself in, careful not to disturb the leaves above. Inside, it was pitch black. He could still hear them outside. And as he started moving deeper into the mud-filled darkness, he had no idea if the tunnel led to freedom or straight into death. Inside the tunnel, the world shrank to nothing but darkness, mud, and breath control. The passage was so narrow that turning his head was impossible. His chest scraped against packed earth, and every movement threatened to collapse the fragile ceiling above him. He moved inch by inch, dragging himself forward with his elbows, careful not to make a sound. Outside, the jungle continued its restless noise, but inside the tunnel, there was only silence. A heavy, crushing silence that made every heartbeat feel loud enough to betray him. The air was thick and damp, filling his lungs with the smell of decay. Each breath had to be slow, measured, controlled. After several minutes, his arms began to tremble. The mud clung to his uniform, weighing him down, pulling him backward as if the earth itself wanted to keep him. He stopped, freezing in place, listening. Voices. The Viet Cong were closer again. Through the thin layer of earth above him, he could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone stepped directly over the tunnel entrance. Dirt shifted. Leaves crunched. A rifle butt struck the ground once, hard, as if testing the soil. He stopped breathing. Seconds stretched into eternity. His lungs burned, screaming for air. His vision sparkled with dark spots, but he refused to inhale. He knew that even a faint exhale might be heard through the loose soil. Finally, the pressure lifted. The footsteps moved away. The voices faded slightly, but they never fully disappeared. He inhaled again, slowly, silently, and continued forward. The tunnel sloped downward, then leveled out. Water pooled beneath him, soaking his sleeves and chest. At times, the passage narrowed so much that he had to exhale fully just to squeeze through. Panic threatened to rise, but he forced it down. Panic wasted oxygen. Panic made noise. At some point, his sense of direction vanished completely. Left and right meant nothing underground. Forward was the only concept that mattered. He counted movements instead of time. 10 pulls. Pause. 10 more. Pause again. His arms were numb now. His fingers had lost feeling. Still, he crawled. Then the tunnel ended. Not in an exit, but in a collapsed wall of mud and roots. His heart dropped. He pressed his helmet against the barrier, listening. No air movement. No space beyond. Just earth. He had reached a dead end. For a moment, despair nearly won. Turning around meant crawling back toward the enemy. Staying meant suffocating slowly in the darkness. His chest tightened as the reality settled in. Then he noticed something small. A crack. A thin line where water seeped through the wall, trickling down in a narrow stream. Where there was water, there might be space. Using his fingers, he carefully scraped at the mud, widening the crack just enough to test it. The earth was soft, unstable. He worked slowly, painfully, removing handfuls of mud, pushing them beneath his body, flattening them so they would not fall back into the tunnel. Each movement felt dangerously loud, but the jungle above masked the faint sounds. After what felt like hours, the opening widened enough for him to force his hand through. Cool air brushed his skin. An exit. But freedom was not waiting on the other side. He pushed his head through and froze instantly. He was still underground, but the tunnel opened into a shallow trench partially filled with water. And at the far end of that trench, no more than 15 meters away, sat 2 Viet Cong soldiers. They were resting, talking quietly, smoking. He could see the glow of a cigarette in the dim light. He pulled his head back slowly, silently, his heart hammering so hard it felt like it might tear through his chest. There was no way past them without being seen. No way to fight. No way to run. He was trapped again. Hours had passed since the ambush. His body was exhausted. His mouth was dry. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but fear kept him focused. He stayed motionless, listening to the rhythm of the voices, memorizing their pauses, their movements. Eventually, one of them stood up and walked away. The other followed minutes later. The trench fell silent. Night was coming, and with it, his final chance. He waited longer than felt reasonable, then longer still. Only when the jungle sounds shifted into their nighttime chorus did he move again, crawling forward toward the trench, knowing that the next few minutes would decide whether he ever saw daylight again. The trench was colder than the tunnel. Water reached up to his chest as he eased himself forward, testing every movement before committing his weight. The mud sucked at his arms and legs, threatening to pull him under if he rushed. Above him, the jungle canopy blocked most of the moonlight, turning the world into shifting shadows and faint outlines. Night was both a gift and a curse. Darkness hid him, but it also hid everything else. He moved when the insects were loudest, letting their noise cover the soft ripples of water and mud. Every few seconds he stopped, listening, his ears strained for anything out of place. A snapped twig, a whispered word, the metallic click of a rifle being adjusted. Nothing. Slowly he reached the end of the trench and pressed himself against the bank. Beyond it stretched open jungle, tangled with roots, vines, and knee-high water. Somewhere out there was a direction that might lead him away from the Viet Cong search zone. Somewhere out there was survival. He waited. Minutes passed. Then more. He had learned patience the hard way. Rushing now would undo everything he had endured. When he finally moved, it was almost imperceptible. He slid out of the trench and into the shallow water, keeping his body low, his rifle hugged tight against his chest to prevent any metal from catching light. He did not stand. Standing made silhouettes. Standing got men killed. He crawled. The jungle floor was a maze of roots and decaying leaves. Leeches clung to his skin, but he ignored them. Pain was irrelevant. Noise was everything. He placed each hand carefully, feeling for sticks before putting weight on them. His knees sank into mud that smelled of rot and stagnant water. Behind him, faint movement caught his attention. He froze. A shadow shifted between the trees, then another. Low voices followed, closer than he expected. The Viet Cong were still sweeping the area, using the darkness as confidently as daylight. This was their home. He pressed his face into the mud and waited again, barely breathing. The voices drifted past, close enough that he could make out shapes, weapons slung across shoulders, bare feet moving silently through water. They were not rushing. They were certain. Once they passed, he resumed crawling, angling slightly downhill. He had learned earlier that water often led away from patrol routes. The Viet Cong avoided noisy, unstable ground unless they had reason to enter it. Time lost meaning again. His body functioned on pure will. His arms were scraped raw. His legs cramped violently, but he forced them to keep moving. Stopping too long risked hypothermia in the cold water and mud. At some point, rain began to fall. At first it was light, almost gentle, then heavier. The jungle drank it greedily. Streams formed where there had been dry ground moments before. For the soldier, the rain was a blessing. It erased tracks. It masked sound. It turned the world into chaos. But it also slowed him. Water rose around him, forcing him to adjust his path constantly. Several times he slid into deeper pockets and had to pull himself out, fighting the instinct to gasp for air. His uniform clung to him like a second skin, heavy and cold. Then, without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. He plunged forward into a deeper channel, his rifle disappearing beneath the surface. Panic surged as water filled his mouth. He fought it down instantly, knowing that thrashing would betray him. He surfaced just enough to breathe, keeping his head low. As he steadied himself, a new sound cut through the rain. Whispers. Not far. Too close. A Viet Cong patrol was moving along the same waterway, using it as cover. He could hear the soft splash of feet, the controlled rhythm of men who knew exactly where they were going. He sank back into the water, until only his nose and eyes remained above the surface. Mud coated his face. Rain ran into his eyes, stinging, blinding him. He did not wipe it away. The patrol stopped. One of them stepped into the channel, no more than a few meters from where he was submerged. The water rippled toward him. The man stood still, listening, scanning the darkness. The soldier's lungs burned, his vision narrowed. Every instinct screamed to move, to escape, to breathe. He stayed still. The rain intensified, hammering the surface of the water, breaking reflections, distorting sound. After what felt like an eternity, the man stepped back out of the channel. The patrol moved on. Only then did the soldier rise just enough to breathe again. He stayed in the water for a long time after that, letting his body recover, letting the jungle swallow the danger once more. When he finally moved again, he changed direction completely, pushing deeper into terrain that even the Viet Cong avoided at night. He did not know it yet, but he had been crawling, hiding, and surviving for nearly 9 hours. And he was not safe. Not yet. Exhaustion had reached a level beyond pain. His body moved mechanically, disconnected from thought, driven by a single command repeated in his mind. Keep going. Every crawl forward felt slower than the last. His arms barely responded. His legs dragged behind him like dead weight. The rain began to ease, replaced by a heavy mist that clung to the jungle like a veil. With it came a new danger. Sound traveled farther now. Every splash, every shift of mud, carried weight again. He adjusted his pace, moving only when the wind stirred the leaves above. The jungle breathed around him, hiding him when it chose to, exposing him when it did not. He could no longer tell how far he had gone. Direction meant nothing. Distance meant nothing. Only separation mattered. Separation from where he had been hunted. Then he heard it. A low mechanical hum. At first he thought it was in his head. Fatigue played tricks on the mind. But the sound grew clearer, steady, artificial. Not insects, not wind. A generator. His pulse quickened. Generators meant a camp. Camps meant people. And in this area, people usually meant the Viet Cong. But generators also meant something else. Structure, supply routes, fixed positions. He slowed to a near stop and listened carefully. Along with the generator came faint voices, different from the patrol whispers he had heard earlier, louder, less cautious, men who felt secure. He edged forward until the jungle thinned just enough to reveal a dim glow ahead. Lantern light, a small encampment, maybe temporary, maybe permanent. Sandbags stacked low, hammocks strung between trees, weapons leaned against trunks. Enemy territory. Turning back was impossible. Staying still would only delay discovery. He needed to pass without being seen. He crawled wide, circling the camp slowly, increasing the distance even as it cost him precious energy. Several times he had to flatten himself completely as figures moved nearby. He could hear laughter, metal clinking against metal, the casual sounds of men who believed the jungle belonged to them. His throat tightened. One cough would end everything. At the far edge of the camp, the ground dropped sharply. A narrow ravine cut through the terrain, choked with water and fallen branches. It was dangerous, but it was dark, and darkness was protection. He slid down into it, controlling his descent as best he could. The fall knocked what little air he had left from his lungs. Pain flared in his side, sharp and immediate, but he suppressed any sound. He lay still, waiting for movement above. None came. Inside the ravine, the air was colder. Water flowed slowly beneath him, numbing his skin. He let the current guide him, allowing his body to drift when possible, saving strength for moments when control mattered. Time stretched again. His mind drifted in and out of clarity. Faces appeared in his thoughts. Home, sunlight on clean pavement, simple things that felt impossibly distant. Then something changed. The jungle opened. The trees thinned. The ground beneath him grew firmer. The water slowed until it disappeared entirely. He felt a subtle but unmistakable shift in the environment. Less cover, fewer vines, different soil. He lifted his head just enough to see. Ahead, faint and unreal through the mist, stood a narrow dirt road. A road meant vehicles. Vehicles meant routes. Routes meant lines between controlled areas. And lines, no matter how dangerous, also meant possibility. But roads were watched. He waited again, scanning the darkness. After several minutes, headlights appeared in the distance, sweeping briefly across the road before disappearing. The sound of an engine faded away. The road was active, but not constantly. He needed to cross it. Crossing meant exposure. Staying meant eventual discovery at dawn. The sky was already beginning to lighten, the deep black of night slowly turning gray. He positioned himself at the edge of the jungle, studying the ground, memorizing every shape, every shadow. He picked a point directly opposite him and fixed his entire focus on it. Then he moved. He crossed the road in seconds, staying low, barely breathing, every muscle screaming as he reached the other side and vanished back into cover. On the far side, the jungle felt different. Not safer, but unfamiliar in a way that suggested he had left the center of the net. He did not know it yet, but this crossing marked the first moment since the ambush when his chances shifted in his favor. Still, the danger was not over, because the light was coming, and daylight would reveal everything he had managed to hide. Daylight crept in slowly, almost deceptively calm. The jungle that had protected him under darkness now threatened to expose every mistake. Colors returned, shapes sharpened, shadows shortened. What had been concealment hours earlier became vulnerability. He stopped moving. Crawling any farther in daylight without cover would be suicide. He pressed himself into a shallow depression beneath thick brush and waited, forcing his breathing to slow. His body shook uncontrollably, not from fear now, but from exhaustion. 9 hours of crawling, hiding, freezing, and surviving had drained everything he had. The sounds of morning began. Birds called. Insects shifted their rhythm. Somewhere far off, human voices echoed faintly. He could not tell whose they were. Minutes passed, then longer. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the jungle. A helicopter. At first it was distant, almost lost beneath the morning noise. Then it grew louder, distinct. Heavy blades chopping the air. His heart surged. American helicopters flew low, often dangerously low, searching tree lines and clearings. But hope was dangerous. He waited, listening carefully. The sound circled, then faded slightly, then returned. The helicopter was searching. He took a risk. Slowly, painfully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small signal mirror, scratched and dirty, barely usable. He angled it upward through a gap in the leaves, watching the sky through one eye. When the helicopter reappeared, moving across a break in the canopy, he flashed the mirror once, then again. He stopped immediately. Seconds felt endless. The helicopter continued forward. Then it banked. The sound changed, growing louder. The aircraft circled back, slower this time, deliberate. He flashed the mirror again, catching sunlight cleanly. The helicopter hovered. Wind tore through the trees. Leaves and debris whipped around him. He covered his face, pressing himself into the earth as the noise thundered overhead. A side door slid open. A figure leaned out, scanning below. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "American soldier, stay where you are." He closed his eyes. For the first time since the ambush, he allowed himself to breathe freely. Rescue was not immediate. The area was still dangerous. The helicopter marked his position and pulled back, calling in ground support. He stayed hidden, exactly where he was, following instructions shouted from above. Nearly an hour later, friendly troops reached him. When they pulled him out of the brush, they barely recognized him. Covered in mud, bleeding from dozens of small cuts, eyes sunken, body trembling, he looked more like the jungle than a man. But he was alive. Back at base, doctors treated dehydration, exposure, and exhaustion. They counted leech bites and infections. They listened as he spoke quietly, almost detached, recounting how he had survived without firing a single shot after the ambush. Word spread quickly. 9 hours behind enemy lines, surrounded, hunted, escaped without being captured or killed. Command later confirmed that Viet Cong units had been actively searching the area all night. Several patrols had passed within meters of where he hid. One group had even paused near the tunnel entrance he had used, unaware that he was already moving beneath them. His survival was not credited to strength or firepower. It was credited to patience, to silence, to knowing when not to fight. Years later, when asked how he endured those hours, he answered simply. He said he stopped thinking about escape as a goal. He focused only on the next breath, the next movement, the next moment of stillness. Because in war, sometimes the greatest act of survival is becoming invisible. And in that jungle, surrounded by enemies, with nothing but mud and darkness between life and death, that was exactly what saved him.